The night it happened, I was in the middle of folding laundry. That's the detail nobody tells you about betrayal. It never arrives when you're braced for it. It finds you doing something ordinary, something mundane. I had a pile of my husband's work shirts on the bed, and I was folding them the way he liked. Collar pressed flat, sleeves tucked in. 14 years of marriage, and I still folded his shirts the way he liked. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I assumed it was him. He'd been at a team dinner since 7, and it was almost 11 now, which was later than usual, but not unusual enough to worry me. Not yet. I picked it up. The text came from his number. But the words weren't his. He's with me tonight. Don't wait up. We've moved past the point where this is your concern anymore. I stood there holding a half-folded shirt and read that message 4 times. Then I set the shirt down very carefully on the bed. I picked up my phone again. I typed back 2 sentences. Thank you for letting me know. You can keep him. I put the phone face down on the dresser. I finished folding the laundry. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. And then I sat at the kitchen table and thought about everything I already knew. Everything I had spent the last 6 weeks quietly, methodically, learning. And I understood that the next chapter of my life had just begun. What I didn't expect was that she would show up at my front door 40 minutes later. My name is Faye, and I need to tell you that I am not a dramatic person. I say that because everything that follows sounds like something out of a movie, and I want you to understand who I actually am before I tell you what I did. I'm a middle school librarian in Raleigh, North Carolina. I drive a 7-year-old Subaru. I make my own granola. I have a book club that meets the second Thursday of every month, and my contribution is always the same, a lemon pound cake and opinions that are stronger than people expect from someone who looks like me. My husband Owen was a project manager at a mid-sized commercial construction firm. We met when I was 26 at a mutual friend's backyard wedding. He was funny and patient and knew how to fix things around the house, which I found inexplicably attractive. We bought a 3-bedroom Craftsman in a neighborhood with good schools, even though we'd never managed to have children. We had a life that looked, from the outside, entirely solid. His supervisor, the woman I will call his director, because that's what she was, had been in his life professionally for about 2 years. He mentioned her occasionally. Said she was intense, ambitious, the kind of person who'd be a regional VP before 40. I had met her exactly once at the company holiday party the previous December. She shook my hand firmly, looked me directly in the eye, and said it was so nice to finally put a face to the name. I thought she seemed impressive. I thought she seemed like someone I might have liked in a different context. I was not wrong about the ambitious part. I want to be honest about when I knew, because I think people expect there to be one moment, a lipstick on a collar, a receipt from a restaurant, a password suddenly changed. For me, it wasn't like that. It was more like a slow accumulation of things that individually meant nothing but together formed a shape I couldn't stop seeing. Owen started working late more often. Not dramatically more often, just enough that I noticed. He became slightly more deliberate about his phone. Not secretive exactly, but careful in a way he hadn't been before. He started going to the gym on Saturday mornings, which was new. And he came home from those mornings quieter than a person usually is after exercise. And there was something in the way he talked about work, a slight flatness, like he was reciting a script rather than telling me about his day. I didn't confront him. I know some people find that strange. The woman who didn't immediately ask what was wrong, who didn't demand answers. But I've read enough stories to know that a confrontation before you have anything concrete is just theater. It gives the other person a chance to perform remorse, to adjust their story, to make you feel like the suspicious one. I wanted something real before I said a word. So I paid attention instead. I went through nothing illegal, nothing I'm ashamed of. I looked at our shared credit card statements. His company card was separate, but we had a joint personal account. I noticed a charge in October at a hotel I recognized, a boutique place downtown that I'd actually suggested to a friend for her anniversary. Owen had told me he was helping his college roommate move that weekend. His college roommate lives in Asheville. The hotel was 6 miles from our house. I sat with that for 3 days before I did anything. Then I called my friend Roz. Not to cry. I wasn't crying yet. I called her because Roz is a paralegal and she thinks the way I needed someone to think right then. I told her what I had found. I told her what I had found. I told her what I suspected. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her. What do you want to know? She asked when I finished. Everything, I said. She connected me with an investigator her firm had used before. His name was Dale, and he was exactly who you'd picture if someone said, private investigator in North Carolina, mid-50s, former sheriff's deputy, absolutely no effect. I met him at a Panera Bread near my school during my lunch break. I told him what I needed. He told me his rate. 6 weeks later, I had a folder. I never opened that folder all the way. I got through enough. Photographs, timestamps, and something I hadn't expected. A name. Not a name I recognized. But when I looked her up, the director, Owen's supervisor, I found something interesting. She had held 2 previous positions at 2 other firms in the Southeast. At one of them, there had been a quiet settlement, non-disclosure agreement. The kind of thing that doesn't show up in a basic search, but does show up if you know where to look and if you have a paralegal friend who knows someone who knows someone. Owen was not the first. I closed the folder. I put it in the lockbox I keep in the back of my closet, behind my winter coats. And then I waited, because I didn't know yet what I was waiting for. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long. She texted from his phone at 10:52 on a Tuesday night. I already told you what I wrote back. What I didn't tell you is that after I put the phone face down on the dresser, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not heartbreak exactly. Not rage. Something colder. Cleaner. A kind of clarity that I have only felt a few times in my life, and always at moments when something I already suspected was confirmed rather than revealed. I wasn't surprised. That was the thing. I had been living inside the truth of this for 6 weeks. I had already grieved a version of it. The text didn't break anything. It just closed a door I'd been standing in front of for a long time. What I was not prepared for was the knock on my actual front door at 11:34. I looked through the peephole first. Owen was standing on the porch, slightly behind and to the left of her, his hands in his jacket pockets, his face doing something I'd never seen it do before. She was standing squarely in front of the door with the posture of someone who has never once in her adult life questioned whether she belonged somewhere. I opened the door. Faye, Owen started. I texted you, she said over him. Her voice was composed, almost friendly, in the way of someone who has rehearsed being friendly. I thought it was better to come in person. I looked at her. I looked at Owen. I looked back at her. Come in, I said. I don't think either of them expected that. I made them sit at the kitchen table. I didn't offer anything to drink. I sat across from them with my hands folded, and I let the silence run for about 15 seconds, which is longer than people are comfortable with, and I watched them both adjust. I owe you an explanation, Owen said. You do, I agreed. But I want to ask her something first. She, his director, raised her chin slightly. She was wearing a blazer at nearly midnight, which told me something about how carefully she had prepared for this. How long have you been doing this? I asked. Faye, Owen said. I'm not asking you, I said without looking at him. She held my gaze for a moment. I don't know what you think you know. I know about the hotel on the 14th of October, I said. I know about the weekend in November that he told me was a work trip to Charlotte. I know about the parking garage on Glenwood. I paused. I also know about what happened at Meridian Construction in 2019 and at Hartwell and Associates before that. The room got very quiet. Owen turned to look at her. He was hearing some of this for the first time. I could tell by his face. She kept looking at me. Her expression had shifted, not broken, but recalibrated. Like someone adjusting their approach mid-conversation. You've been investigating me, she said. I've been learning, I said. There's a difference. Whatever you think you found. Let me ask you something directly, I said. And I want you to understand before you answer that I am not asking because I'm angry, and I'm not asking to make a scene. I'm asking because I think you deserve to have someone ask you plainly, to your face. I waited a beat. Is Owen the first married man in a professional relationship you've pursued this way? Silence. Because I don't think he is, I said. I think you have done this before, at least twice, and I think at least one of those situations ended in a way that cost someone a significant amount of money and required a legally binding agreement about what could and couldn't be said. I think you chose men who were mid-career, slightly insecure at the particular moment in a marriage when things feel less exciting than they used to. I think you're very good at this, and I think you've never had anyone sit across from you and say all of that out loud. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either, which told me she was someone who processed exposure as a challenge rather than a collapse. I had expected that. I'm not done, I said. Owen made a sound. There's something else you should both know, I said. My friend, the paralegal, she showed my documentation to a colleague of hers who practices employment law. Not as a client, just a conversation, hypothetically. He had some thoughts about whether a pattern of this nature between a direct supervisor and subordinate employees might constitute a hostile work environment under Title VII. He had some thoughts about what a company's potential liability might look like if it became clear that leadership was aware or should have been aware. I watched her face. That's a hypothetical, she said. Her voice was still level, but something had shifted underneath it. Entirely, I agreed. I'm a librarian. I'm not an attorney. I'm just someone who spends 6 weeks reading very carefully. She left first. She didn't slam the door. She didn't make a scene. She stood up, straightened her blazer, and told me, with a composure I will grudgingly admit I respected, that she could see I'd made up my mind and that she wouldn't insult me by pretending this conversation had gone any other way. She walked out. I heard her car pull out of the driveway. Owen sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. He tried several things. He tried apologizing. He tried explaining. He tried asking me what he could do. Each time I answered him quietly and waited for him to finish. And when he finally ran out of things to say, I told him what I had already decided. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to perform anguish for his benefit or hers. I was going to file, and I wanted the house. We had equity, and I put my mother's inheritance into the renovation 4 years ago, and I expected him to cooperate, because if he didn't, the documentation I had would become relevant in ways that would be uncomfortable for everyone, including his employer, including her. He cooperated. I want to tell you about the part that surprised me most, because it wasn't anything I'd planned for. About a week after that night, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The name in the sender field was a woman. I'll call her by the name she used, which was her first name, Carrie. She said she'd worked at Hartwell & Associates 6 years ago. She said she had heard, through someone she wouldn't name, that questions were being asked. She said she had signed something that prevented her from saying certain things, but that she wanted me to know I wasn't wrong, and that she was sorry it had happened to someone else, and that she had always hoped someone would eventually say out loud what she hadn't been able to. I wrote back. I thanked her. I told her what had happened and what I had done, and I told her she hadn't failed by signing that agreement. She had made the choice she needed to make at the time with the information she had. We have emailed each other several times since then. She lives in Greensboro. We are not friends exactly, but we are something. Her email is what made me decide to send one more message of my own. I am careful about what I say here because I did consult the employment attorney, a real consultation, this time, before I sent it. What I can tell you is that I wrote a letter to the HR director of Owen's company, a factual, documented, carefully worded letter, which outlined what I had learned about a pattern of behavior involving a senior employee and at least 2 previous positions at previous firms, and which raised the question of whether the company had any awareness of this pattern when it hired her, and whether it had any interest in knowing about it now. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. I kept a copy. The divorce was final 7 months after that night. I kept the house. I kept the Subaru and the book club and the granola recipe. I kept the friendships that had always been mine. I kept Roz, who cried in my kitchen the day the papers came through, and then helped me open a bottle of wine I'd been saving since our 10th anniversary, which felt like the right occasion to finally use. Owen moved into an apartment across town. His director, the woman who had texted me from his phone, resigned from the company 4 months after I sent that letter. I don't know the details. I didn't ask. What I know is that she is no longer in that role, and that the company added new conflict of interest language to its employee handbook, which is a matter of public record because my friend Roz looked it up just because she could. I thought about her more than I expected to after it was over. Not with anger, but with something more like curiosity. I thought about Carrie's email. I thought about the other woman at Meridian, whose name I never learned, who had probably also signed something and gone home and wondered whether any of it would ever catch up. I thought about what it must be like to be that certain of yourself, to walk into someone's home at midnight in a blazer and believe you are the only person in the room holding any cards, to have done this before, more than once, and to have always walked away intact. She almost did it again. What I want you to take from this, and I know that sounds like a strange thing to say because this is my life, not a lesson. But what I want you to take from it is this. The moment she texted me from his phone, she believed she was in control of what happened next. She thought she knew how this scene went. She had probably watched it play out before, in some version, and she knew her lines and she knew where the exits were. What she didn't know was that I'd been in the audience for 6 weeks, watching the stage get built. Calm is not the same as passive. Planning is not the same as cold. And the most powerful thing I ever said to that woman was not something I screamed. It was 2 sentences I typed quietly in my bedroom while standing next to a pile of folded laundry. Thank you for letting me know. You can keep him, because by the time she read those words, I had already decided what came next. I just hadn't told her yet. That's the thing about walking away with your head up. You don't have to run. You don't have to announce it. You just have to know very clearly where you are going, and then you go. I bought a new bed for the house. White linen duvet, which Owen would have hated. I sleep very well in it. The book club is still the second Thursday of every month. Last week we read a memoir by a woman who rebuilt her life in her 40s, and afterwards someone said it must be nice to have that kind of courage, and I thought about saying something, and then I just cut another slice of lemon pound cake and let the evening keep going. There's a time to speak and a time to simply know. I've gotten pretty good at telling the difference. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone who's standing where I was standing, next to a pile of laundry, holding a phone, reading words that were meant to undo her. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. What happened to me, and what happened to Carrie before me, and probably to the woman at Meridian whose name I never learned. None of it was random. It followed a logic. Not a fair logic, not a kind one, but a logic nonetheless. People who operate without accountability tend to keep operating because no one has ever made the cost real to them. She had done this before because doing it before had cost her nothing. The pattern continued because the pattern was never interrupted. I interrupted it. Not by screaming, not by showing up somewhere and making a scene, by being quieter and more prepared than she expected anyone to be. That's the part I want to sit with for a minute because I think it matters. I'm a librarian. I'm not a lawyer, not an investigator, not someone who grew up knowing how institutions work or how to navigate a certified letter or what Title VII actually means in practice. I learned all of that because I had to, because I decided that understanding was more useful to me than rage, and because I had a friend like Roz who helped me think straight when thinking straight was the hardest thing in the world to do. Roz is not a coincidence in this story. She's a choice. I had spent years investing in that friendship, showing up, listening, being the person she could call. And when I needed someone to think clearly beside me at the worst moment of my adult life, she was there. The people you build relationships with in ordinary time are exactly who you have in extraordinary time. That's not luck. That's accumulated intention. Owen made choices too. And I've made a kind of peace with the fact that his choices were his own. He wasn't stolen. He participated. That distinction used to feel like it made things worse, but now it feels like the thing that actually set me free, because it meant his choices weren't a verdict on me. They were information about him. I was allowed to receive that information and act on it, which is exactly what I did. What I keep coming back to is the 6 weeks. The 6 weeks of paying attention quietly, gathering, thinking, not reacting. I don't think I'm a naturally patient person, but I learned something in those weeks that I haven't forgotten. The moment you react is the moment you hand control to whoever provoked you. I refused to do that, and that refusal, That one decision to stay in my own lane, to keep my own counsel, to know before I spoke. That was what changed everything. She walked into my kitchen believing she was the only prepared person in the room. She was wrong, and the distance between what she believed and what was actually true, that was the whole ballgame. I bought white linen sheets for the bed. I still make my granola. The book club still meets the second Thursday of every month. The things that were genuinely mine are still here. Everything else turned out to be on loan.